right, let's dive into this story. I'm going to take you on a journey, a roller coaster of emotions. And by the end of it, I promise you'll feel something profound. So buckle up and let's begin. The shadows of soil. I remember the day like it was yesterday. The day my world crumbled, the day I was betrayed, the day I was laughed at, and the day I decided to rise from the ashes. It was the day I was called a fraud, a charlatan, a danger to the very thing I was trying to save. My name is Dr. Ilara Vesper, and this is my story, The Gripping Hook. I stood in front of the Agricultural Council, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I had spent years of my life developing drought-resistant crops, a beacon of hope for farmers struggling with the changing climate. But as I presented my research, a familiar face stood up, a man I once called a colleague, a man I trusted. He smirked, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your research is unnatural," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "It's dangerous. It's a fraud." The room erupted in laughter, and I felt my world shatter. That was the day I was sabotaged, the day I was humiliated, and the day I decided to change the course of my life. The painful departure and relentless pursuit. I left the council that day, with my head held high, but my heart was heavy. I had dedicated my life to agronomy, and in an instant, it was all taken away from me. But I refused to let that define me. I refused to let them win. I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When one door closes, another opens. But sometimes you have to create your own door. And that's exactly what I did. I redirected my passion towards urban mycology. Yes, you heard it right. I, Ilara Vesper, decided to study fungi. I remember the ridicule, the laughter, the disbelief. Fungi? "You're studying mold now?" they sneered. But I didn't care. I was on a mission to prove them wrong, a mission to restore ecosystems, a mission to feed struggling cities. I moved to the heart of the city, a place where nature was a distant dream. I started small, in my tiny apartment, cultivating mushrooms. I faced countless challenges, countless setbacks. But I was relentless. I was determined. I was driven by the sting of rejection, by the unwavering resolve to prove my worth. The arduous ascension and profound triumph. Years passed, and my small apartment turned into a laboratory, a hub of innovation. I developed revolutionary mushroom networks, networks that could restore devastated ecosystems, networks that could feed entire cities. I faced skepticism, doubt, and ridicule. But I also faced triumph. I faced success. I faced the undeniable proof that I was on to something big. I remember the day I stood in front of a barren land, a land that was once a thriving forest, but was now a wasteland. I remember the day I planted my first mushroom network. I remember the day I watched it grow, watched it spread, watched it bring life back to the land. It was a sight to behold. A testament to my hard work, my dedication, my passion. I remember the day I stood in front of the same Agricultural Council, the day I presented my research, my triumph. The same man who once laughed at me, who once called me a fraud, now stood in awe. He couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't believe what I had achieved, and neither could anyone else. The cathartic return and poetic justice. But the most powerful moment, the most unforgettable moment, was when I returned home. I returned to the place where I was once laughed at, once ridiculed, once called an embarrassment. I returned to the place where my family lived. I remember the day I stood in front of my family, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I remember the day I showed them what I had become, what I had achieved. I remember the day I showed them the power of my mushroom networks, the power of my urban mycology. I remember the day I showed them the barren lands I had restored, the cities I had fed. And I remember the day I saw the looks on their faces, the looks of shock, of disbelief, of pride. I remember the day they apologized, the day they admitted they were wrong, the day they realized that their ridicule, their derision, had only fueled my fire, had only made me stronger. But more than that, I remember the day I forgave them. I forgave them for their past actions, for their past words. I forgave them because I understood. I understood that they were afraid, afraid of the unknown, afraid of the ridicule they might face for supporting me. But I also understood that they were proud, proud of what I had achieved, proud of the person I had become. The insightful ending. And so my story comes to an end. A story of betrayal, of ridicule, of relentless pursuit, of profound triumph. A story of forgiveness, of understanding, of insight. A story of the shadows of soil, of the power of fungi, of the restoration of ecosystems. But more than that, it's a story of hope. A story of hope for those who are ridiculed, for those who are laughed at, for those who are told they'll never amount to anything. It's a story of hope for those who are told their dreams are ridiculous, their ambitions futile. Because I am living proof that dreams do come true. I am living proof that ridicule can be turned into fuel, that derision can be turned into determination. I am living proof that the shadows of soil can be turned into a beacon of hope, a beacon of life, a beacon of triumph. And so, I leave you with this insight, this lesson, this truth. Never let anyone tell you that your dreams are ridiculous. Never let anyone tell you that your ambitions are futile. Never let anyone tell you that you'll never amount to anything. Because you will. You will rise from the ashes. You will overcome the odds. You will achieve your dreams. And when you do, you will shine brighter than anyone could have ever imagined. And that, my friends, is the power of a story. A story that captivates, a story that inspires, a story that leaves a lasting impact, a story that is not merely a story, but a visceral emotional experience, a story that is the shadows of soil.